Hello, everyone. I'm Jessica Smith. I lead the ecosystems workstream at UNEP. Welcome to this panel for Asia Pacific as part of the UNEP Regional Roundtable. I'm very happy to warmly welcome Elizabeth Maruma-Marema, who is the Executive Secretary of the Convention on Biological Diversity. Thank you so much, Elizabeth, for your time in opening this panel for us. Then we will move on to Dechen Charing, who is the UNEP Director for the Regional Office of Asia Pacific. Finally, we have a fantastic panel after that to discuss the relevance of this topic to FIs in the region. So we're looking forward to having you here today. Thank you.
Thank you for inviting me to open this session of the UNEP Financial Initiative Regional Roundtable for Asia Pacific. The Convention on Biological Diversity is where the world's governments meet to decide how to conserve and sustainably use biodiversity and how to share the benefits arising from the use of genetic resources in a fair and equitable way. The Convention, with its near universal representation, supports its parties in developing strategies and action plans to implement the aims of the joint agreements in their own domestic context. Biodiversity is important for financial institutions to be aware of. For one, it needs to be understood as a financial risk through similar pathways as we see in the case of climate change. Through physical effects, transitional effects, via compliance demands, and as reputational risk. The loss of biodiversity needs to be understood as both an ecological and an economic emergence, compounding the climate crisis that challenges the very foundation of life on Earth. Second, the businesses that you finance, invest in, and insure depends on nature and a safe climate. They rely on healthy and abundance found in our ocean, land, and forest for their supply chains and raw materials, and for solutions to our development challenges. Biodiversity also presents a sustainable finance opportunity for the development of new financial products and offerings in what is estimated to be a new multi-trillion-dollar market over the coming decade. At the Conference of the Parties 15 in Kunming, China, parties to the Convention on Biological Diversity are expected to adopt an ambitious and transformative post-2020 global biodiversity framework. We hope that this will be an equivalent of the Paris moment for biodiversity. We expect the final framework to include language calling for the progressive alignment of financial flows with the nature positive objective within a firm time frame. This will be equivalent to the language in the Paris Agreement, which has driven efforts towards measurable net zero emissions. Similar to climate, this nature framework will unlock new opportunities for financial institutions, and those who will be ahead of the curve will benefit the most. The financial community has a critical leveraging role to pivot economic sectors towards a more positive impact on nature. The call for the financial community to act became even louder as the world strengthened its nature goals and build new techniques to measure nature loss. These efforts include the UN Decade of Ocean Science for Sustainable Development and UN Decade on Ecosystem Restoration, both of which touch on major regional environmental priorities. I am pleased to be the co-chair of the Task Force on Nature-Related Financial Disclosure, or TNFD, which was launched earlier this month. This is the Task Force Climate-Related Financial Disclosure, or TCFD, for nature. which will play a similar transformational role, bringing attention to the impacts and dependencies between finance and nature and their knock-off effects for economic stability. I urge you as banks, insurers, investors in this dynamic Asia-Pacific region to join together and show market leadership. Regionally, you have a lot to offer to the rest of the world, including through your innovation. I look forward to a showcase of your regional leadership at the Conference of the Parties 15 later this year and aligning your portfolio with net zero, nature positive economy. Thank you.
Good morning, good afternoon, good evening. It's a pleasure for me to join UNEP Finance Initiative's Asia Pacific Regional Roundtable. As many of you know, on June 5th, millions of people across the world celebrate World Environment Day. This year's theme is Ecosystems Restoration, Resetting Our Relationship with Nature, and we will launch the UN Decade on Ecosystem Restoration 2021 to 2030. This decade is designed to prevent, halt, reverse degradation of ecosystems worldwide, bringing together political support, scientific research, and financial mobilization to massively scale up restoration with the goal of reviving millions of hectares of terrestrial and aquatic ecosystems. The decade of ecosystem restoration will be important for the Asia and the Pacific region. The massive socioeconomic and demographic changes represented by mass urbanization and rapid economic growth in the region come at the expense of biodiversity loss. We're using the equivalent of 1.6 Earth to maintain our current way of life, and ecosystems cannot keep up with our demands. But humanity is not outside of nature, it is part of it. We must recognize that the restoration of nature is imperative to the survival of our planet and the human race. Nature underpins our current and future prosperity. Half of the world's GDP is dependent on nature. And for example, coral reefs alone generate $36 billion per year for the global tourism industry. Yet, currently, the majority of the essential benefits of nature have no financial market value. So, for example, while scientists estimate 37% of aquatic species are threatened in the Asia and the Pacific region, you will not see many financial institutions in the region taking this into account as a risk to their lending. Such collective failure to understand and value nature will increasingly lead to financial losses in the future. We need to understand the financial opportunities of hardwiring the value of nature into our economic system. Existing data shows every dollar invested in restoration creates $30 in economic benefit. The conservation, sustainable use, and restoration of biodiversity can provide significant business opportunities, including long-term viability of our business models. The global organic food and beverage market, for instance, is expected to grow 16% a year to reach 327 billion by 2022. Restoring the population of marine fish to deliver maximum sustainable yield could increase fisheries production by 16.5 million tons, annual value of $32 billion. Hence, investing in nature is expected to support sustainable economic growth in the 21st century. Let me end by touching on the investment needs for nature. If the world is to meet its climate change, biodiversity, and land degradation targets, investment in nature must at least triple in real terms by 2030, increase fivefold by 2050, equating to a cumulative total investment of up to 8.4 trillion and a future annual investment rate of $500 billion per year. Today, the current investment level is only a fifth at approximately $130 billion per year, with public finance making up the bulk at 86% and private finance only at 14%. Hence, scaling up private capital for nature-based solutions is a central challenge for the next few years. Our collective investment in nature can reduce the risk of another zoonotic disease pandemic, save countless lives, prevent another economic fallout. Ecosystem restoration will support a challenge against climate change, strengthen food security, and offer multiple economic, environmental, and social returns because, simply put, humans cannot live without nature. I'm very excited to see financial institutions globally and in the Asia and the Pacific region becoming really aware of climate change. I call on you to start expanding your horizon to biodiversity and ecosystem services. UNEP Finance Initiative is working with banks, investors, and insurers around the world in deepening their understanding of the risks and opportunity for your business around nature. I encourage you to look into this kind of platform. I thank you for your kind attention.
We are today focused on what FIs need to know about the CBD COP. We're going to be looking at the topic of nature from a sustainable finance point of view and a risk point of view, and looking at it through a regional lens today. So I'm Jessica Smith. I lead the ecosystems workstream at UNEP FI based in Geneva. We are working with the members on the topic of risks and disclosure, alignment of portfolios, and supporting the enabling environment around FIs in our membership. So within the theme of risk and disclosure, nature is still an emerging topic, and many of our members are familiar with the TCFD for climate, and the topic of nature is starting to emerge within the TCFD, particularly around Scope 3 emissions. But we are also seeing the launch very soon in the coming weeks of the Task Force on Nature-related Financial Disclosure. So this is going to be a similar type of process to develop a reporting framework that will be adopted by FIs and potentially brought into regulation in a similar fashion that the TCFD has. So that's a very exciting development. In terms of portfolio alignment, as Elizabeth Marema mentioned in the introduction to this panel, the CBD COP is expected to present a post-2020 global biodiversity framework, and that is expected to have clear language that allows for metrics around nature, the same way that the Paris Agreement Article 2.1c called for the alignment of finance and unlocked metrics around climate and financial portfolios. So this also links to FIs in terms of 37% of nature-based solutions are needed to deliver on the Paris Agreement net zero commitments. So that's a clear link into the climate agenda. And it also unlocks new opportunities to align portfolios to these nature positive outcomes. Then in the enabling environment, there's a lot of work being done within central banks right now, and many of the central banks, starting with the Dutch National Bank and now the Bank of England, Banque de France, and some emerging market banks are starting to use the Encore framework to look at the exposure of their financial sectors to natural capital risk. So that's leading then to a response in terms of regulation on natural capital risk that's just very at the beginning of starting to emerge. So I'm very happy to have three fantastic panelists today. We have Peiwan Guo from our China office in UNEP FI, and we have two colleagues from commercial banks in the region. So Ryan Bjorkquist is at Standard Chartered based out of Singapore, and Rosemary Bissett is at the National Bank of Australia. So we're really happy to have all three of you on the panel today. I'm going to start with Peiwan, if you could give us a little bit more of the regional scene setting, and particularly out of China, where the COP will be hosted.
Can you hear me? Okay, thank you, Jessica. So this is Pei Yuan. I'm based in Beijing. I serve as the China advisor to UNEP FI, and I'm also the chairman of China CIF and Sintao Green Finance, based in Beijing. I think the nature and biodiversity definitely are important issues in the region in Asia Pacific. And we see some progress, some regulators, including Singapore, Indonesia and Thailand are thinking about nature. But I have to say that most in the region still remain the focus on climate and have not yet looked at nature issues. And the main regional discussion now on around finance and nature is linked to the CBD negotiation, as Jessica mentioned, which some of the countries are engaging. And I think as I'm based in Beijing, I see a similar case in China as well. So we all know that China announced the so-called 2030, 2060 carbon peak and carbon neutrality goal. So many financial institutions are now talking about climate issues. And basically that occupy the media, newspaper. However, there are some progress related to the nature and biodiversity, and I think partly the reason is because that we are going to host the forthcoming CBD COP 15 in Kunming City in Yunnan Province, which is in the southeast China. And actually, this is the region with great diversity resources. And there's some progress, for example, in China that when we talk about green bond in China, we also have the so-called green bond standard. And our regulators just announced the latest version of the green bond standard. We can call it the second version of the green bond standard. And in this version, actually, the regulator include several items on biodiversity in two ways. First is that protecting biodiversity resources may be able to eligible for a bond. And second, doing no significant harm as a new principle is also included, and biodiversity protection, of course, is one of it. So these two items, two elements are included. And at the same time, China also actively participates in the NGFS work, and we have expert, Dr. Ma Jun, he's heading the work, one of the working group in NGFS, and recently he also collaborated with Inspire Network that NGFS and Inspire is going to do a research to understand the relationship between biodiversity and financial stability. And I think this is a very amazing development.
Thank you so much, Hye-Wan. Yes, that's indeed a very important development in this landscape. I'll come next to Rosemary, and Rosemary, you've been really involved in this topic for such a long time, and really one of the thought leaders in this space. So I'm wondering if you could just introduce yourself, and what does this topic mean to you and to NAB, and what has your focus been so far?
Thank you, Jessica. It's a pleasure to be here today and to take part in this discussion, and it is definitely a topic that's near and dear to National Australia Bank's heart. We started the journey in 2011, way back when the Natural Capital Finance Alliance was launched as the Natural Capital Declaration, and we saw that launch at the Rio +20 Summit. And NAB and Rabobank were the inaugural signatories to that. And it started an 11-year journey, and we've still got a long way to go. But like climate, which has been going for a long time, I think we're starting to see real change now on the biodiversity front. And I'll reflect, I think it was at a global roundtable of UNEP in Paris, and one of the CEOs that was on the podium talking about climate change, he mentioned that the next wave would be biodiversity. And I think he was right. So he was making a future prediction, which I think is starting to come true now. So for us, biodiversity is part of natural capital, and we've integrated natural capital into our strategy under the terminology natural value that connects to our bankers. And absolutely, we believe, and it was mentioned by Pei-Yuen, that there is a positive relationship between improved natural capital and biodiversity as part of that, and long-term financial performance and resilience. So we've been on a long-term journey to be able to link that really solid management of natural capital with credit risk in the long term, and being able to use that to sort of understand the performance of our customers and the profitability and resilience of our customers going forward. So it's an important journey. And along the way, we've been involved in quite a few partnerships and initiatives, as well as the Natural Capital Finance Alliance. We've been involved in what started out as the Natural Capital Coalition, and there's now the Capitals Coalition, and the development of their biodiversity guidance. We in Australia, as each of our governments in parties to the Convention for Biological Diversity has an obligation to work with business. We're part of the Biodiversity Partnership in Australia, which is called the Australian Business and Biodiversity Initiative. And that's really provided a fantastic platform to discuss with other business, with NGOs, with the scientific community, and with government. I guess for us in Australia, how we can help in terms of taking forward Australia's commitments under that, under the CBD, as Australia makes its commitments, and how we contribute globally to the new targets that are created there, because finance and the capital we provide has a key role to play in that. In addition to that, now what we see evolving, and I think the Natural Capital Finance Alliance has had a key role to play, is the evolution, like with climate. We've seen the Task Force on Climate-Related Disclosures is now the move to see the establishment of a Task Force for Nature-Related Disclosures, and we're an observer to that process. And that will be an important process that really takes a step up in how we all set strategy, governance, risk management, targets and metrics as the finance sector and as business writ large, to really start to quantify and understand both our impacts and dependencies on natural capital and the opportunities that are there for us as a finance sector to help the real economy make a difference. In Australia, 77% of the natural capital assets are under private management. That means it's incredibly important for us to actually play a role in encouraging our customers, because they're the ones that hold these assets in their hands for the future. And they impact on the ones that are managed by government. If you think about the fact that one of the issues in Australia is that, runoff and pollution from agriculture into the barrier reef, which has actually had a detrimental impact on the reef itself. So, and that's a huge economic asset to us as well, because if you think about the tourism that's generated there and the businesses that get their livelihoods from that natural capital asset. So internally, natural capital has been built into our risk management systems. So looking at biodiversity issues as part of our ESG credit risk assessment and due diligence process is part of the way we've built it in. Within agriculture, and that's a key part of our business banking book. So we bank $1 in every $3 to agriculture in Australia. So the agriculture sector is really where the rubber hits the road in a big way for us. And so a lot of our emphasis has been working with agriculture. So some of the things that we've done is to survey our agricultural customers to actually look at how they see natural capital issues and biodiversity, because they don't talk in that sort of language. And when you talk to farmers, we've seen soil health, water scarcity, biodiversity and native vegetation, and then the opportunities for carbon sequestration coming through as big issues of concern, alongside energy costs and climate change. So you can actually see it is of key interest to our customers. And we've had a number of research partnerships over the years to I guess, help us build that understanding around natural capital. So with CSIRO, the Commonwealth Scientific Industrial Research Organisation in Australia, we've looked at, there's been a survey of 160 graziers, and that's actually established a positive relationship between natural capital and long-term financial performance of those graziers' assets. So the next stage of that work is to investigate how that aligns to the financial data. We've been doing work with the Australian Wine Research Institute, and that's around their sustainability benchmarking tool to embed financial metrics there alongside the sustainability metrics. And then ClimateWorks, which is a research institute connected to Monash University, has also been working on natural capital metrics, because one of the big problems has been having the right metrics to link financial performance to things like biodiversity, so you can really clearly show the business case and link it to things like credit metrics when you're a bank. And so they're the sorts of initiatives that we're doing to integrate consideration of biodiversity into the bank's DNA.
Great, thank you so much, Rosemary. That's just such a huge body of work and really well distilled, to give a flavor of it. So Ryan, I'll come to you now, and you're at Standard Chartered based in Singapore, and Standard Chartered is currently chairing the Equator Principles, which has also been quite a leader on biodiversity from the risk perspective. So I'd love to hear more about this topic from your perspective and how Standard Chartered approaches them.
Thank you, Jessica, and thank you for having me today. So once again, my name is Ryan Bjorkquist. I'm a director of environmental and social risk at Standard Chartered, and based in Singapore. So when it comes to biodiversity, it really is one of our key pillars when it comes to environmental and social risk. So it's something we prioritize just as highly as climate change and human rights, and we really is one of the key drivers when it comes to our due diligence process. Not only for our clients, but for project-related finance as well. Biodiversity is something that, when it comes to information collection and the due diligence process, is often something that can be very expensive, and it could also be very time-consuming from a client perspective and from a project perspective. So it's really important that when we are going down our process, that it's something that is identified early on, so we could identify what those potential risks are, identify them, and then mitigate them as needed. As it relates to the Equator Principles, we recently updated the principles in 2020 to EP4. And one of the key changes, or one of the key updates to the principles, was the highlighting of the need for biodiversity information, and really elevating it to the point where it's really prioritized for clients and for the projects. So one thing that we've done is we've identified the need for guidance on how to collect that information, and what to do with it afterwards. So oftentimes the information gets collected and then it kind of just sits in a vacuum. So maybe a project would collect information around migration patterns or waterways, but it doesn't really leave that vacuum of the project. So one thing we've tried to do within the association is say, let's share that information. Let's share it with the wider group, when it's available and when it's possible to do so. So we've created a couple guidance notes within the association on what the expectations are for biodiversity information gathering, how that relates to due diligence, and then how that can be shared with a wider audience. And really, the collection of this baseline information and this monitoring is essential for us to understand the impact of a project to its surrounding areas, and the natural environment that it's going to reside in. As an emerging markets bank, there's a lot of impact to our markets when it comes to biodiversity. Oftentimes, a lot of project finance in emerging markets is in areas where there is a high abundance of biodiversity. So it's something that is really essential for us as we go through our due diligence process. So, we try our best to leverage those best international standards. So whether that's the IFC performance standards and the the requirements set forth there in biodiversity, and really try to bake that into our process, not only at the bank, but in the larger association as well.
Great, thanks, Ryan. That sounds extremely practical and useful. So that's wonderful. Peiwan, we are seeing more and more signatories from Asia Pacific region to some of the key initiatives that touch on biodiversity. Do you see this as a general trend that awareness is growing?
Yeah, I believe that the awareness is increasing step by step, and I think the people's understanding on this biodiversity and the nature issue is also evolving as well. I think in the past 10 years, we have a strong policy on green credit, actually asking the banks to take care of the environmental and social risk, and that's also connected to many biodiversity issues. But right now, we also see there are lots of opportunity for green product innovation. So we will expect that the awareness in the market will increase, and we will perhaps we will see some more financial innovations. One example is that again on green bond, there are some latest development that create some new products in the market. For example, the SLB, Sustainability Linked Bond. Actually, just a few weeks ago, there are around 8 companies in China, in mainland China, issue sustainability linked bond that link their return, the investor return, to a specific targets related to sustainability. And of course, you can imagine right now those targets are about energy and climate carbon issues. But I think there are, as Rosemary said, that potentially I think there might be opportunity that we can connect these targets to biodiversity. So I would hope that this will be something that we'll expect to see in China and also in the regions. And again, I think we all realize that the CBD conference will take place in this region in China. And I believe that UNEP FI will bring in the financial institutions in the region to attend the discussion. And that will also raise some awareness and share some best practice as well. And I'm still quite optimistic on this.
Fantastic. And Rosemary, NAB is starting to look at biodiversity in a sustainable finance context. Can you tell us a little bit more about that? Oh, you're on mute.
Oops. Okay, I think I've got it unmuted. Sorry about that. Yeah, so as was mentioned, as well as the sustainability linked bond, another product that's innovating, or is an example of innovation, I think, in the finance sector, is the sustainability linked loan. And as part of the metric suite for there, we've started to look at biodiversity opportunities as well. So we have, in one instance, actually been able to link in, as part of the suite of metrics in a sustainability linked loan, a biodiversity metric. It is harder to do that than some of the other metrics because you've got to have good baseline data and really have clear a clear insight into how the improvement's going to be made and to be able to set targets. So you've got to have a clear picture on, I guess, what the biodiversity benefits are going to be. And so I think in the context of the CBD, understanding what its objectives are in the national context for each kind of company where you're considering biodiversity metrics, understanding what the country level metrics are that are trying to be achieved, and then fitting in and considering in that context how a company is going to contribute to the achievement of those goals within its operations and a project will be key. So I think having the new CBD goals there will actually help that conversation. And then the TNFD, the Task Force on Nature-Related Disclosures, will be helpful too, because I think one of the things there that's needed is the methodologies and getting agreement on those methodologies, because you want to make sure that what you do is credible and well understood by the stakeholders that actually are trying to track that performance as well.
Wonderful. Thank you so much, Rosemary. I wanted to quickly come to Pei Wan again, just to touch on the blue economy, because I know Rosemary mentioned coral reefs. And, you know, I think oftentimes when we think about nature, we think about the terrestrial world, but actually, you know, it also includes freshwater and marine ecosystems, so oceans. So I know, Pei Wan, we've had 3 new signatories from China for the blue economy. How do you think that that issue is taking hold in China and the region? Is it clear to FIs how the blue economy links to either risk or sustainable finance?
Thank you. Yes, I think ocean and blue economy, it's particularly important in this region. And UNEP in the past 2 or 3 years, we are promoting PRB, Principle for Responsible Banking, and also the Sustainable Blue Economy Financial Principle, as well as PSI on the insurance. And actually, we see more Chinese signatories for all these principles, and the latest one, actually, there are already 4 signed up Sustainable Blue Economy Financial Principles. And I have to say that biodiversity is an important part of that principles. So I believe that if more financial institutions sign up that principle, they need to think about how to, you know, really implement the principle. And I did discuss this topic with some of the members that signed the principles, and we have a common question: is that how to really make it happen? So I think we need to share some best practice with the financial institutions, particularly here in China, that sign up the principle, to tell them if we want to protect the blue economy and make it sustainable, how we can do that. Whether we need to, for example, integrate the so-called environmental and social risk, or particularly biodiversity risk management into the whole financial process, investment decision-making process. Or we can have some new way to develop some new products to finance or different kinds of activity related to a sustainable blue economy. And that still remains a question. And I think there's quite a lot of financial institutions in the region want to know more. At least this is the situation that I see from China.
Great, thank you. So I would like to sum up the key messages as I see them, and then I'm going to come to Rosemary and Ryan and ask you both if there's something else you want to tell your peers about this topic. So I think the headline of this panel is what should FIs in the region know about the CBD COP and all the developments that are around biodiversity. So as I see it, the key headline is that the CBD COP is coming. It's heading to China later this year. This is a once-in-a-decade event, and we expect an outcome similar to the Paris Agreement, which will call for the alignment of finance to the goals of stemming nature loss and restoring nature. These clear goals are expected to create points for alignment of portfolios to nature positive, the way that we've seen the movement for alignment of portfolios towards towards net zero. Furthermore, the risk-based approaches to biodiversity that underpin stemming the tide of nature loss from a financial perspective have really improved and developed. And there's been some great developments in Equator and NCFA and other processes. The metrics are improving and the availability of data is improving through various efforts. Then also we're seeing the growth of sustainable finance opportunities around biodiversity, and it's increasingly bankable. And these opportunities are not only on the terrestrial side, but increasingly in the marine ocean space as well, and in freshwater ecosystems. From UNEP-FI's perspective, we are very excited within the end of this month to be launching a new module on the Encore tool, the Exploring Natural Capital Risks, Opportunities and Exposure tool. And actually NAB has been one of our piloting groups to test that. And that will be a tool to help the alignment of portfolios towards a biodiversity net positive goal. Also in June, we will be launching some guidance for principles for responsible banking signatories and other interested banks on how to set biodiversity targets, which we hope is a valued piece of this puzzle. And then likely in the next few weeks, the task force on nature-related financial disclosure will move from the preparatory phase that we're in now to actually the full task force launch. And as part of that process, we will be communicating the opportunities for FIs to get involved in piloting of the TNFD framework, which will be focused by subsector. So there's a lot of great opportunities for FIs to be involved. Now, Rosemary, just a moment's quick pause with both you and Ryan. Are there any other key messages you want to share with your peers in this space on biodiversity?
I think mine would be, if you're not already connected, engage with your national government and the area of the government that's engaged in the CBD process, so that they can you can start a dialogue with them. Engage, look for which part of the government has the Business and Biodiversity Partnership platform in the country, or multiple countries of operation if that's the case. That will give you an opportunity to both and through UNEP-FI engage in the COP process, which I think is important because, as you said, it's a once in every 10 years process that the biodiversity targets are being set. And I think also consider, and Ryan, you might want to talk more about this, engaging through, if you're an EP's signatory, engaging in the biodiversity processes there. Have a look at the Encore tool and have a play, and check out some of the other tools that are available for you. And then we're always happy to talk to peers, so that, sorry, the lights have just gone out. Participate in the UNEP-FI work as well around this topic, so that we can build that coalition of banks that are really supporting good natural capital and biodiversity management.
Wonderful. And Ryan, I'll come to you. We haven't touched very much on the links between nature and net zero commitments, but that may be part of Standard Charter's thinking. Happy to hear any other messages on this topic to you from Standard Charter's perspective to your peers.
Yeah, thank you. I think biodiversity is a unique challenge. But it also provides some really unique opportunities. So, perhaps a couple parting comments. It is a time-consuming process. It is something that needs to be identified early. When we're talking about biodiversity studies, it could be months because we're dealing with migratory patterns of animals and species. It's not something that can be handled with a questionnaire, right? So you need people on site, you need a duration of time to really collect quality information. And so I guess I would just highlight the importance of quality information and sharing that, because once you have that baseline, it really does open up everything that Rosemary and Pei Wong talked about. It opens up opportunities for sustainably linked products. It opens up opportunities for target setting. and goals and everything that goes with that. And then lastly, the importance of, the question around net benefit. So one of the objectives of our due diligence process is trying to provide that net benefit. So if there is an impact from a biodiversity perspective, from a project, not only identifying it, but then how do you provide a net benefit at the end of the day? And that's really one of our goals as well.
Great. Well, thank you so much, Peiwan, Rosemary, Ryan. I think this has been a great session today, and we're looking forward to all these exciting developments in the coming months on nature and biodiversity. Thank you so much.
Thank you.